Hey everyone, in this video I will show you how you can manage SharePoint list and library permissions using Power Automate Flow. Hello everyone, I'm Deepak Srivastav and welcome to my channel. And thank you very much for the subscribing to my channel. So in this video, I'll walk you through what all the different options are available in Power Automate Flow to manage SharePoint list or library permissions. Sometimes we have a requirement where we want to set up a unique permission on the list or the library. That can be the entire list library can have unique permissions, or you want to set up some folder and those folders should have the unique permissions, and every item that you are going to add inside those folders should inherit from those folders. So we're gonna see all of these different options in this quick video. Okay, so to start with, let me show you what I have already set it up. So I have created one list and one library in my SharePoint. So I will start with instant flow. Okay, so the flow is created. Now let me first show you what is available right now for the permissions in flow. So we will go to the SharePoint, and if you select the SharePoint actions, these are all the actions right now available with SharePoint. So if you look at all of these different actions, there are only few those are actually related to the permissions. One I'm seeing here, it's saying create sharing link for a file or a folder. This is when you wanted to share a link to someone for a given item, right? We're not going to use this today. The other one that we have is grant access to an item or a folder. This is to set a permissions or give permission to someone on a given item or folder. We will use this action, and other than that we don't really have any direct action in flow right now. Okay, so what we're going to use this action, that is send an HTTP request to SharePoint, and this action is going to help us using widely available REST API for permissions in the SharePoint. So the first API or first thing that we need to do when we are working with a SharePoint list or library and you wanted to have a unique permission for that, you need to break the inheritance. If I go back to my SharePoint, and let's start with document library. And if I go to the document library settings, if I go to the permission for this document library, so as you can see right now, this library, and it applies to list as well, inheriting the permissions from its parent, so from the site. In the site, I have these three groups. So members have edit or contribute permissions, owner have full control, and visitor has read permissions. So my library is also going to have the same permissions. So if I add a user into the member group, they will get contribute access to this library. Or if I add someone to the owner group, they will be the owner of this list or library. Let's say we don't want that. We want to make sure that this library or list should have a unique permission. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do, we need to break this inheritance. If I need to do manually, I'll come to the list, go to the permissions, and click on this stop inheriting permissions, and this will help me doing that. But we are automating this, right? So in the flow, we're gonna use the send HTTP request to SharePoint because there is an API available that can break the inheritance. And that is our first API that we are going to learn. Okay, so just to give you a quick walkthrough of this action, send HTTP request to SharePoint, you need to provide these 5 information for any request. The first thing is site address. It's pretty straightforward. This is the address of your SharePoint site. So I'm using this site today. And then the method. So if you look at the method drop down, there are 5 different type of method that you can pick from. So get is when you are trying to query in some information from SharePoint. So for an example, get items, right? You're just querying the data. So that is your get request. Put, post, and patch, it is when you are trying to update or create some new information into the SharePoint. We are going to use post, okay? Then the next is the URI. That's the actual URL of your API request. In our case, we are going to use this API. Okay, So the API that we are going to use is saying API web list get by title, and then you need to provide the name of your list. Okay. Now remember one thing, it can be list or it can be library. You can provide the library name or the list name. So this is the name of the library. So go back to the flow and paste the name there. So underscore API web list get by title. Okay. Then we have this method. It's called break role inheritance. That is very similar to what we just check under permission for this document library. Stop inheriting permissions. Okay. Then we have copy role assignments. What this means, if you look at this, any list or library that you could create, it will have these default permission group added. Default, I mean to say the one that already parent have. Once you stop inheriting the permissions, you have two options. You can keep them just for this library, or you can remove them. So this library will not have any user or group other than the person who is actually changing it or the owner of this site. So this copy role assignments is for that. If you set it true, you will keep those three group adjust into the library. If I say it false, then once I break the inheritance, I won't see these three group here. Okay. So we are going to say false. And then it's saying clear sub scopes. This is if your list or library already have some folders, right? And if you are breaking the permission for a folder or the list, it will actually apply the same permission inheritance to all of that underlying child element. So if you are breaking the permission on the folder, it will apply the same logic to anything that is underneath that. So we are going to keep the true. Okay, so this is your URI to break the inheritance of a given list or library. Then the most important part is the header. Generally, when we do the get, if you just provide this header, this is more than enough for the get method. But when you are doing post, there are some additional header you should always provide to make sure that your request gets successfully done and you won't get any like 403 or some other unknown error from the SharePoint. Okay, so second header that we need to provide is the content type. Okay, so the content type is very similar to the accept. The next header that you need to provide is called if match. And in this, what you can pass, you can just pass the star. And what the if match is doing, it check during the request or when you are sending this request, if the item that you are trying to update, modified has been changed. Then the next one that we need to pass is the request digest. So request digest header confirm the validity of your request. It's very important for the SharePoint. So if you are using the post, patch or put method, you should be passing this header. Okay, and because we are just breaking the inheritance, we are not really passing any body because this is not something we are creating new in the SharePoint. So this is your request to breaking the inheritance for a given list and library. Okay, so this is our request for breaking the permission. Let's save it and we are going to test. So flow completed successfully, as you can see here. Now if I go back to my list, refresh the permissions, and as you can see here, all the groups those were there has been removed because if you remember, we have set it that flag to false, and the only user I have is myself because I was updating the permissions. Plus you can read here saying this library has the unique permissions. So we have successfully break the inheritance for this library. Now the same concept apply to the list as well. So if I change the title from library to list, you will still have the same result. It will break the permission on that list. Now let's say you don't really want it to break the permission of the entire list or library, but you are creating a document library in which you are going to create multiple folders and you want each folder to have a unique permission. So you don't want that folder to inherit permission from its parent, that is the library or the list. So how you can do that, right? So for that, let's create a new folder, and this time we are going to pick the automated cloud flow. Okay, so I'm giving the name break permission, and I'm going to pick the trigger when an item is created. So my flow is created, and now it's asking me where you want this flow to run. So I'm gonna say into this SharePoint site. So when you pick the trigger when an item is created, by default, Flow will only give you the SharePoint list as a drop-down. But if I click on Enter Custom Value, now what I can do, I can go to my library and use the title here. And it will work when I create a file or upload or create a folder into this library. Okay, so our trigger is ready. The next step is, it's very similar what we have did previously when we are breaking the permission for the entire list or library. We are going to the SharePoint, send HTTP request, site address, as you know, it's going to be the site where I'm working right now. Method, you all know, it's post, the URI. Okay, so this was the URI that we have used in our previous example, right? API list get by title, break role inheritance. But this time we don't want to break the inheritance on the entire list. Instead, we wanted to break permission on the item that just got created, right? So you need to add items, and then in item we are going to pass the ID of this newly created item like this. Okay, so now the URL has changed a little bit. API web list get by title, title of your list in library. Then you are adding items, passing the ID, header, and everything else is going to be very similar what we have used in our previous flow. And let me show you how you can actually easily copy that. So I'm going to open that flow that I have created. Okay, so this is the flow that we have created, and these are the header that we have added. Click on the small icon here, and you can copy this whole header section. Go to your flow, click again, and just paste it. So let's save. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to my library and I'm going to create a new folder. And now let's wait for this new flow to get triggered. Okay, so as you can see, flow completed successfully. Let's open that and see what happened here. Okay, so as you can see here, I don't see any issue in this flow run. Let's go back. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to this folder and go to the manage access. And as you can see here, this folder has only 2 users. That's all me. And just to show you, if I go to the advanced, and as you can read, this folder has the unique permissions. But if I go back to the library setting and permission for this document library, this library is still inheriting permission from its parent, from the site. Okay, so now we have the library in which we can create folder. Those can have the unique permissions. Now you can do this for a given item. You can also do the same thing for a given file. So if you want your file to have a unique permissions but not the entire library or the list, you can just use this URI. Okay, so far we have break the permission on the library or on a given item, that is folder or the file or actual list item. But let's say now we just don't want permission to be break. We wanted to give the permission for someone or create new permission on that folder or item. Okay, so we are going to use the SharePoint action that is available in Flow for granting a permission for an item or a folder, right? And the action is grant access to an item or a folder. I select that. Site address is the address of your SharePoint site. List library. ID is the ID of this item that just got created. So in the recipient, you can add the person name who you want to give access on this item. Okay, so I'm going to pick one user from my site, right? And then you can define the role, whether they should be able to edit or the view. You can also pass the custom role here if you know the roles information, right? So I'm going to give Chris as a view permission on this folder, right? They will also receive an email. I can provide the message that I wanted to give from this action. And also, do you want to notify this request recipient, yes or no? So I'm going to say no. I don't want to send an email. So now this grant access, now this apply to all the user. You can pass multiple people here if you want to. Save it and let's test. Okay, so the flow successfully completed. Now let's go back to the Chris screen. And as you can see here, now I can see the folder 1 when I logged in as a Chris. But if you see here, you are seeing this small icon. It's definitely showing me that I have only the view only access on this library. Now let me do one quick change on the flow. So now instead of Krish, I will add a Lisa name here. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to create another folder. Okay, so I created the second folder. So flow got completed successfully. And so now if I go to the login with as a Chris, there is no folder 2 available here. But if I go to my login and if I go to the library, I can see 2 folders, right? So the folder 1, because I have given access to the Chris, he has access. Folder 2, he doesn't have access. So this is how easily you can manage these different folders and the permissions. Now, if you notice in the flow, right, we are saying whenever a new item got created, break the inheritance and grant access, right? Now, let's say you don't want to run this flow or break the permissions when someone adding the file, right? You just wanted to break permission on this top level folder. So what you can do in the flow, either you can add a check here. If it is a folder, then only break the permissions. Otherwise, don't do it. So in that case, what will happen? Your files will always inherit permissions from the folder that you are adding them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a condition here. You can also use the trigger condition. So just keep it simple. I'm just going to add a new action and condition. And what I'm checking here, I'm just going to search for is folder. If this is true, then the break permission and then the grant permissions, else do nothing. So the flow will not do any change when you are adding the file. I'm going to save it. Now let me upload a file in this folder. Okay, now let's wait for flow to kick in. Okay, so flow triggered and it triggered for the file. And if you look at here, this, because I have uploaded the file, the break inheritance and the grant access has not kicked in. So if I go back to the file and the folder, and if I look at the file permissions, it is still using the same permissions, and you can check by advanced and saying stop inheriting. So it is inheriting from its parent, that is folder 1, because folder 1 has the same permission, right? So yeah, so this is how you can manage the permissions. Now there are so many permutations and combination you can try. The concept was not really to walk you through what all different permutation and combination you can create, but how you can actually break the inheritance and how you can grant the permission for a given item in the folder. So we have break the permission on the list. We learned how to break permission on a given item or the folder, and also we have learned how to grant an access to a given item or the file. Now let's say I wanted to reset the whole thing that has been done. I want to reset the permission that I broke for my list and start inheriting from the parent again. Okay, so for that, let's create another flow. I'm gonna pick instant. Okay, so let me show you the list. So we have this list, demo list, right? And if I go to the list settings, and if I go to permission for this list, so this list has the unique permissions, right? It is not inheriting from the site. And I can also remove, let's say, let me remove these 2 groups from here. So this list has very unique permission that I set it up. Let's say I wanted to reset all of that to the default. So for that, go to your flow. Again, we are going to do very same thing. Send HTTP request to SharePoint. Pick your SharePoint site URL method. We all know it's going to be the post URL. Okay, so URI is very straightforward. Again, API web list get by title, the name or the title of your list or the library. And the method is reset role inheritance. And that's it. You just need to use this URI to reset everything. And for the header, this time the header that we are going to use is very simple. We are just going to send the request digest header. And as I said, the request digest is confirming the validity of this request when you are sending it to SharePoint. Okay, save it and run it. Okay, so flow completed successfully. And now if I go back to my list and go to the permission for this list, as you can see here, it is back to the normal. It is having all those 3 group added back here. All the unique permission has been removed. So these are the 3 basic actions that we have covered today: breaking the inheritance for a given list, a folder, item in a list or library, granting a permission to a given item or the folder, and then resetting everything back to the default. So thanks for watching.